I'm speaking to you at what I know is an increasingly challenging time. A time of disruption in the life of our country. A disruption
Like,
brought grief to
yeah,
some,
people are gonna die.
financial difficulties
It's
to many,
just terrible, but
and
like,
enormous changes in the
inevitable?
daily lives of
Motherfuckers,
us
just
all.
stay at home.
I don't know. Maybe I should
I
be
want
doing
to
this
thank
right now.
everyone on the NHS frontline.
Easy if you try.
Kid,
Poor kid! What are you talking about? He's the richest kid in the world!
you don't have children, do you, Dave?
In the middle of this cursed community quarantine, I decided to put on the 1994 movie Richie Rich, the lesser-known Macaulay Culkin film. The story, adapted from the 1953 Richie Rich comics, follows, well, Richie Rich, the poor little rich boy with $1 billion to spend but with no real friends. In the same week, I watched Richie offer $10,000 to a couple of neighborhood locals. The Philippine president threatened our life and democracy in a series of late-night announcements reminiscent to our martial law.
Shoot them dead!
I was never familiar with the rich. That's not to say I lived in poverty either. I lived in the perfect middle of it all, able to afford sleeping in an air-conditioned bedroom each night, but never being able to save up enough to travel outside the Philippines. From time to time, I could afford a delicious luxury. I write this essay on a MacBook Pro I received from my father 6 years ago. My phone, while not exactly an iPhone, can play a high-functioning mobile game during my downtime. I don't need to worry about going hungry during the community quarantine, with my only real problem being the loneliness a temporary LDR brings in. In some ways, I'm very much like the children who comfortably leech off the generosity of Richie and his family. The scenes where the kids skate around his office remind me of my own time in my rich friend's house, enjoying luxuries I could never have for myself in the middle of the day, but still going home to a functional house by nighttime. When Gloria's mom, the union leader, thanks Richie's family for somehow beating the non-functioning trickle-down system of Adam Smith with more industrialization and more underpaid workers and a new factory in a not-rich neighborhood, I let out a humorless laugh. I'm reminded of people close to me who admire powerful men for making business decisions that would ruin marginalized communities in my area. When Gloria turned down Herbert Cadbury's promised $100 because she finally saw the human behind the billions and billions of dollars of the rich family, I scoffed, wanting the money for myself. When Richie rolled his eyes at his contemporaries for wanting more money and asked them to be kids for once in their life, I wondered what would Richie do now. The original Richie Rich comics was written in 1953, a decade after the great boom of the 1940s. After World War II ending on September 2, 1945, America entered what I can only describe as a liminal space where anything was possible. The economy boom brought about hope. Hope for a wholesome American family with 2.5 kids and a white picket fence, with high wages and successful futures. For a world where the coronavirus didn't exist because of pure perfection. I can only imagine that the collective resentment we all feel now towards billionaires didn't exist, and if it did, it wasn't the animating philosophy for the vast part of its younger generation. Coming hot into the market with the phrase "poor little rich boy," Richie became Harvey Comics' golden boy, alongside some of the more popular comic characters of Harvey Comics, Casper and Little Lota. When Harvey Comics died in 1982, Ape Entertainment revived Richie Rich in 2011 and described him as, and I quote, "a mix of James Bond and Indiana Jones with a bank account of Donald Trump. Richie is an altruistic adventurer who travels the world helping the less fortunate." But what is altruism for the rich? I remember the news that Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey pledged $1 billion to combat COVID-19, and I can't help but think that this is what the writers of Richie Rich imagined him to be, thinking that he somehow connects with the people by donating approximately, 28% of his personal wealth to a privatized health company, which some say will inevitably make a good profit for him. In a somewhat tangentially related point, it was around the same time Gal Gadot and a bunch of other celebrities made the controversial Imagine Instagram post in an effort to be a beacon of positivity in these dark times. We're all in this together. In the first chapter of Paul Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, He talks about the relationship of the oppressed and the oppressor. When on an even playing field with the power dynamics and an oppressive system similar to capitalism, the oppressed go through a process called dehumanization, where they become tools and objects of the rich and nothing more. There is no room for wants or desires, unlike the oppressor, who is free to indulge and enjoy his humanity because he inherited it most of the time from the generation before him, whereas the oppressed have to work for it, even if they shouldn't. As I write this essay on the Richie Rich I grew up with in the 1994 feel-good movie and in the 5 a.m. Cartoon Network show, I can't help but hate this 10-year-old billionaire for what is, according to his creators, his greatest virtue: altruism. There's no proper explanation why Richie Rich became rich. However, one thing is clear: his family runs a multitude of companies that the middle and working class benefit from, and that this inherent goodness of theirs comes from an unexplained connection with the real people and $1 billion. They're somehow able to connect with the masses in ways their peers cannot, and yet the disconnect with reality remains when one realizes how easy generosity is to them. Charitability is the driving force of the riches, with their whole moral compass hinging on the idea that they have to give in order to live like what is, for all intents and purposes, a good billionaire. Which is fine, I guess. If there's anything we can get from the very people who run our current monopoly, it's at least their money here and there when we need it, which is always. But one can't help wonder just how bad charitability actually is when it, whether unintentionally or subtly, serves as both a crutch for terrible governance and a cover for greed. At the same time, there is something incredibly unethical about people being able to give so much money that it could power the whole community, but having so much more to run a museum in the backyard. Going back to the pedagogy of the oppressed, Paul Freire talks about the ways the rich cannot ever truly liberate the poor or join the fight, or whatever you call it, because the rich is the very reason the poor are poor. This is because of the unfair allocation of resources in our neoliberal society. Neoliberalism is an economic ideology which allows the elite to accumulate most of the wealth of the people because of the lack of government intervention in economic practices. In particular, this hinges upon Adam Smith's theory of the invisible hand. If businesses are left unattended by the government, they will be able to self-regulate. The whole thing is reliant on the idea of business competition, wherein individuals are seen as consumers with whose democratic voice is exercised perfectly by choosing what brands or what products to buy and patronize. This form of competition, in theory, will help maintain the quality of goods and labor conditions. However, in practice, we all know that this is complete bullshit. Rather than competition, this free hand only encourages monopoly. In a way, this unfair system normalizes class inequality, with everything being privatized without restriction by the very same companies who run every aspect of our society, from education to healthcare. In the name of the invisible hand, we internalize the creeds of capitalism. This is how the rich manage to position themselves as altruistic. They're the only ones who benefit from the current system in place. So while yes, it looks good on paper to be able to donate a lot of your money, in the same way idealized billionaires like Richie Rich are, no one should have that amount of money in their bank accounts in the first place. It's unethical, especially in the middle of a crisis like the coronavirus. So eat the rich. If you go on Twitter, you'll see this phrase repeated multiple times over and over again by the general online public, and they're not even receiving the shorter end of the capitalist stick, in a way. Plenty of those aren't being shot dead on a daily basis because they have to walk to the grocery. Plenty of those online, including myself, aren't being red tagged by the government, and plenty of us can afford to hashtag stay home as everything passes by. But at the same time, we're currently angry, and most of us are still suffering from the consequences of capitalism. We reject the ideology and reject the creed that we once internalized when we were kids, and even before that. The question is, why did it take so long for us to realize it? I don't want to say that we've been selfish, however, as angry as we are, being rich was always the goal for us. Not because we're necessarily bad people, but because this kind of thinking was indoctrinated in us by our family, and it's not even their fault. It goes back generation to generation to generation. If Freire mentions this when he talks about the over-reliance on the rich. Other than relying on our income, we also want to be like them to escape from our current predicament. We latch on our humanity to them and they expect us to work for them. The system is already broken. I find it difficult to end this video on an uplifting note because what am I supposed to say? Be strong, have hope, reject the rich? Of course I believe in those things. Of course we should reject systems and have hope and somehow believe in a future made better, a future made with a reformed and totally different economic system that aims to redistribute wealth and dismantle the oppression brought about by imperialism and colonialism. However, we all know this. I can't just make a video and say capitalism bad because everyone knows that now. We're currently living in times where Richie Rich would be considered one of the biggest assholes of 2020, and for good reason. He'd donate 50% of his wealth to create his own privatized health company to find the vaccine against COVID-19. He'd have enough money left to maintain the amusement park in his backyard and take Gloria continent hopping. He'd make a stay-home video with his friends, open his doors to whatever middle-class neighborhood lives near his giant mansion, and wish everyone a happy and positive day on Twitter. We'd hate him, and I'm glad that we'll finally hate him. That we can't just say that and say that now is the time to act, because you should have been acting beforehand. We should have been acting beforehand. I should have been acting beforehand. Comfort is a luxury, and once we realize that we have to go beyond and above everything that we ever want, the new normal shouldn't be normal. We don't know where the end of the COVID-19 will take us. We don't know what life will be like after this community quarantine. But I do know that we are at the cusp of a global mass resistance, and this is the only way to liberate us from an oppressive system. And Richie Rich and everyone like him won't be able to help us. Hey guys, so sorry for the somber video, but I just had a lot to get out of my chest. Right now I'm safe. I'm one of the lucky ones, I'm one of the privileged ones, and I hope that wherever you are, whatever happens, you're able to seek shelter, whether from the government or from other organizations. And I think it's more about staying at home. People applaud you for staying at home if you have privilege, but more than that, you should be resisting the oppressive forces from your home, of course, but you should be resisting. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I hope you guys are fine, and I'll see you next time.